Hi everyone, I'm Life Peng from Today's Inspiration, and you're watching a special Canada Day edition of Looking Through Old Magazines. Up to this point, everything we've looked at on Looking Through Old Magazines has been an American publication, but today's July 1st, which is Canada Day here in Canada, so I thought maybe we'd try something a little different. My friend Rob dropped off this stack of old magazines, Family Herald, Canada's national farm magazine, just last week. That's pretty good timing because that gives us an opportunity to have a look at something that you might not normally ever get to see. Now, I've been through these and took some time to mark everything that I thought might be of interest. All right, well, let's take a look inside one of these issues of Family Herald magazine. And down here, we learn that Family Herald established July 2nd, 1869, and published in Montreal by the Montreal Star Company. And right here it says the art director was George M. Ray. And in this particular issue of Family Herald, guess what? There's actually an illustration by the art director, George M. Ray. Now, my friend Jolene Grove, who is a illustration researcher and writer and educator, created this pretty fantastic resource online called the Index of Canadian Illustrators. And on here, I did a little searching for George M. Ray, and sure enough, there he is, George Menendez Ray, born 1913, died 1992. And check this out, he was actually born in New York City, but then lived most of his life in Canada. So that's kind of cool. There's a little bit of information about him on here, and I actually managed to find some other interesting things by searching a little further. So my friend Ivan actually wrote this really fantastic and thorough biographical piece on George M. Ray. And it turns out that earlier in his career, he was a Canadian comic book artist. And he created a character called Canada Jack that I guess was pretty popular for a while. George M. Ray is also responsible for doing the artwork for what was at one time a very popular series of trading cards called Lowney's Sports, Yesterday and Today. And I Googled that, and it turns out there are quite a lot of those around. I guess if you're a trading card collector, maybe this is even something you're familiar with. Anyway, that's a little bit about the art director of Family Herald, George M. Ray. Every issue of Family Herald has an editorial cartoon signed McNally. And there was a famous Canadian editorial cartoonist named Ed McNally, but because this was a agricultural publication, all of McNally's editorial cartoons in here had an editorial theme. So let's take a look at some of those. The other thing that I found in every one of these issues of Family Herald magazine is a comic strip called Juniper Junction. And I can't say I had ever heard of it before, but it's a really sweet little strip. And not necessarily so much about farming as it is about small town life and all the characters that you might encounter in any sort of typical, rural, small town kind of environment. And what really interests me about this strip is this really lovely cartooning style. What I didn't realize immediately was that this strip was drawn by a Hamilton illustrator, and I'm a Hamilton illustrator too. This cartoonist's name was Doug Wright, and he drew a long-running comic strip that appeared in the Weekend magazine, which was sort of an insert in the local newspaper that was published right across the country as far as I know. It was called Doug Wright's Family, and before that it was called Nipper, which was the name of the kid in Doug Wright's Family. So it's really a delight to discover that Doug Wright drew another comic strip, Juniper Junction, that I'd never heard of before. And now here are a whole bunch of these strips that we can enjoy. Now, there's also some really outstanding advertising illustration in these issues of Family Herald. Unsurprisingly, a lot of it is, agricultural product related. And this ad, I thought, was really something interesting. It's actually a two-page ad, the way they chose to present it is interesting in itself. This is page 1. And then that leads you to this big double-page spread for Massey Ferguson. This would have been created by a major advertising industry for sure. And what's so interesting about this illustration for me is, keep in mind, this is the late 1960s. This kind of very graphic, hard-edged, flat color kind of illustration was not very typical at the time at all. And when we look at it from today's perspective, this is a perfect kind of illustration, almost like a textbook case for vector art. Anybody doing something like this today would very definitely do it in Illustrator, and it would not be a very big deal. But what you need to remember is that this was done by hand. Something else I've been thinking about this piece that is kind of interesting is that there's a very good chance that although this was probably sketched out by hand, it may not have been executed in ink. It may actually be the product of rubylith overlays. And I'd be really curious if anyone can leave a comment explaining what rubylith was, because it's kind of like, at this point, it's kind of like ancient art making technology. But it is something that I had a chance to work with at the beginning of my career, and I wonder if anybody watching this also is familiar with rubylith and can tell us a little bit about it. So if you can, please leave a comment. Here's another really technically excellent advertising illustration in Family Herald. And this one is very likely a combination of India ink, and I have a feeling it may be that this area here, if you look at the way the pattern crumbles away, it may be scraper board. I'm not positive about that. It may also be what was known as zipatone or letratone, but I don't know. It's hard to say for sure. But once again, if you have any theories, please leave a comment. And here's one more very nice advertising illustration, or rather 2 spots on 1 page of ads. And this, I'm quite sure, is just, your classic pen and ink, brush and ink combination. And yeah, just a really nice looking piece that is so impressive because it's just so strong. Very nice graphic style. I had to include these 2 ads that I found in Family Herald for Buckingham cigarettes. And some of you who are watching this might even just be surprised at the very idea of magazines having cigarette advertising in them, but it was really, really common well into the 1980s, and this is the 1960s. But what's so interesting about these 2 ads is the illustration style is just really kind of unusual, a little hard for me to identify, and I don't really even know how to quite describe it, but almost a little like unpleasant for advertising, a little bit surprisingly stark and kind of dark. So I'm not really sure what the agency's strategy was here. I'm not sure what kind of customer they were trying to appeal to. It's interesting. I absolutely could not place who the illustrator could have been, but they're interesting. Here's the second of the 2 Buckingham cigarette ads. And yeah, I don't know. It's a really curious style. I don't want you to think that I don't think it's good. I think it's very good. But it's just not something I've ever seen before, having looked at quite a lot of Canadian illustration work from this time period. And I'm just kind of surprised that I have no idea who the artist was, and B, just at the nature of the style that the agency chose to advertise Buckingham cigarettes. It just seems a little unusual. But once again, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, so please leave a comment. Now, here's a big ad. It's actually 3 pages of illustration done in a very, very professional, advertising art style for the time. And again, this being a Canadian publication, I assume it's a Canadian illustrator. I'm not really sure. Maybe 2 illustrators. One would have painted the figures and the environment. The other one would have painted the technical subjects, the farm equipment. So this is really something else. I didn't find very much in any of these magazines that matches this kind of, professional quality. This is the kind of illustration style that was very, very popular coming out of Detroit at the time, when Bernie Fuchs was, very much the illustrator of the day. And I thought, could this perhaps be by Will Davies? But I'm just really not sure. And for this big double-page spread, when I first looked at it, I thought it was photography. It really almost looks like some of it is photography and some of it is painted. Like the background, those trees are definitely painted, and the crop that's being harvested there, that's definitely painting. But the vehicle, is that a photograph? It just seems so hyper realistic. I almost can't believe it's an illustration. But there were illustrators who could do technical subjects to just an incredible degree of finish. So maybe. Anyway, I thought it was worth focusing a little bit of time on, just because out of all these issues of Family Herald, this is the one time where there is something that is just exceptionally real. One name I came across several times in these issues of Family Herald was William Scholl. Again, someone I've never heard of before, but I have to say his work is really good. So I'm kind of surprised that I've never come across any of his artwork in other Canadian magazines like Maclean's or Chatelaine or Canadian Home Journal, because he certainly had the skills. And it would surprise me if this was the only magazine artwork that he did, but he may have done work for books, for example. That was another fairly big market for professional illustrators in Canada at the time. I looked him up online and I really didn't find a lot, except a page of auction results of paintings by William Scholl, including what I assume must be a self-portrait. And so this may be, aside from his birth and death, this may be the only visual information that we have of this Canadian artist and illustrator, William Scholl. I want to finish off this look at Family Herald magazine with something really curious that I found in one issue only. There wasn't anything like this in any of the other issues. A profile of a commercial artist. A profile of an artist named Jill Sharp, a young commercial artist, enjoys the excitement and challenge of working in advertising. And what we learn when we read through here is that Jill, 21, was raised on a tomato farm in Kingsville near Windsor, Ontario. And then she went on to study and got her first advertising job in a Calgary department store, where she gained practical experience in layout art, finishing art, and producing ads. And the article goes on to talk about her career path and things like, her working conditions. There's a lot of interesting reading in here about something that was pretty exceptional at this time. Generally speaking, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I'm sure maybe even to some degree in the 70s, there were far fewer women working in commercial art than men. So this is kind of neat to see this profile, and especially in an agricultural publication. I guess the connection was that she was originally from a farm family, and then left agriculture and went to the big city and got a big city job. So a very, very interesting look at a time in our history that a lot of things were changing. A lot more women were entering the workplace and getting these kinds of very high profile white collar jobs. So congratulations to, what's her name? Jill Sharp. She would have been a bit of a pioneer at that time. I wonder what became of her, how her career progressed after this point. Hopefully it was a big success. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this special Canada Day episode of Looking Through Old Magazines. It's now July 6th, so Canada Day was way back there. Took a lot longer than I thought it would, but oh well. Hopefully it was interesting. If you liked this episode and you think you would like watching more of these episodes, there's 2 buttons down there, a thumbs up and a subscribe button. Please press both of those. If you have any comments, that would be great. I'd love to hear what you think about what we looked at today and what you think about old magazines and illustration from the mid-20th century in general. Until next time, have a great day. I'll see you with episode 7.